The Midland Railway Centre in Derbyshire has been in operation since 1970, and during this time has transformed a piece of wasteland into one of Britain's best loved preserved railways. The centre's efforts have been recognised by a royal visit in 1986 and more recently by the awarding of an M.B.E. to John Twells, President of the Trust after being Chairman for 25 years since its foundation.
Welcome to the Midland Railway Centre. My name is John Twells. I'm the President after being the Chairman for 25 years. I think the great thing about the Midland Railway Centre at Butterley is that it is a group of 1,500 volunteers or thereabouts, plus 35 associated groups who've turned an industrial slum into something really worthwhile. We run the Midland Railway Centre here at Butterley in Derbyshire, and we have created a working museum railway line. We have turned an industrial slum into something that is almost presentable, and which now has something like 3,000 trees and bushes, major museum buildings and station, where we inherited a site, the worst railway preserve site in the country, with not a single building on it. I hope that during the next hour of this tape you will enjoy what you see and think, as I do, that it has got a great future.
Nottingham Victoria Station in the 1960s, and the winds of change are blowing over the railways of Britain. By the end of the decade, the station would be just a memory. And across at Derby Works, the last steam locomotive to be overhauled, number 75042, was outshot on the 20th of September 1963. Amidst these changes, a project group was formed from the Derby Museum Committee in 1968 with the idea of founding a working railway museum to commemorate the part that Derby and the LMS had played in British and indeed world railway history. Originally, 6 or 7 sites were discussed, and after an early idea to take the project to Roseley was abandoned, a line was chosen which ran between Codnor Park Junction and Ambergate via Butterley. This line had originally served 8 pits and occasionally been used for passenger relief services, but had been abandoned by M.B.E. in the 1960s. The station at Butterley had been razed to the ground, and few could have foreseen at the time that the line would become one of the most successful in British railway preservation. In the very early days, one of the most important jobs was the acquisition of railway equipment for future use in the project, and since B.R. was at that time altering many signalling systems from boxes and semaphores to coloured lights, a large amount of signalling equipment could be salvaged. These scenes show the dismantling of Ridding's box in 1969. It was also important to acquire locomotives. Alan Wilson, a steam loco inspector and B.R. official at Derby, had advised the centre that for their needs 3F Ginty locomotives would be ideal, since the loads weren't likely to be too excessive and the route fairly short. With this in mind, the centre has over the years built up a core of Gintys and spare parts. 47445 was collected from Hargreaves on the 14th and 15th of July 1970 and is now in a dismantled state awaiting restoration. In June 1970, an 040 saddle tank locomotive Gladys was collected from Staveley Works. This was the first engine owned by the centre and is the sole surviving loco built by Markham and Company. Built in 1894 and named after a member of the Markham family, she was out of use by 1965 and moved to Butterley in 1970. Put back to working order over 4 years, she did sterling work in the early days of the preservation project. She now stands in retirement in the Matthew Kirtley Museum. .040 crane tank Stanton 24 originally worked at Stanton Iron Works and arrived at Butterley from Cambro Contractors' Yard at Claycross after purchase by the Stanton 24 group. Built by Barclay in 1925, this locomotive is also now on display in the Matthew Kirtley Museum. The legendary scrapyard at Barry contained large numbers of withdrawn steam locomotives in the early 1970s. 73129 was one member of its class fitted with Caprotti valve gear and was recovered from the scrapyard to Butterley in January 1973. Although the loco has never yet ran at the centre, restoration is now well underway and has reached the rolling chassis stage. But back on the line there was still much to be done, and work started on the Butterley station site in September 1973. The first open day was held 2 years later in 1975, and all of the centre's industrial and ex-B.R. locomotives were prepared and put on show to the general public. Amongst the exhibits was RS9, the first loco to work on the centre's main line. A motor-rail simplex locomotive, this featured a bell on the axle, which can be heard clearly in this archive film. Around this time, exhibits were stabled in the Butterley platforms. Items of railway interest had been collected by working parties, often under the leadership of Pat Larkham, head of B.R. stores at Derby. This W.H. Smith bookstall had originally been sited on Nottingham Midland Station. But at this time, there were still of course no directions for passengers to travel on trains, and also no station on the Butterley site. Two things taken for granted by the visitors of today. In the mid-1970s, two more locos arrived at the centre from Leicester Stonygate Museum. The first, a Kirtley 240 built in 1866, was numbered 158A, and after arrival in 1975 was repainted at Toton Diesel Depot in Nottinghamshire. When completed, the loco was then towed up the Erewash Valley by Class 20 Diesel Type 1 number 2197. And on arrival at Ironville, Class 042271 helps the loco onto the site. The second locomotive was Midland Spinner number 673, which after a superhuman effort by volunteers at the centre was returned to steam on the 23rd of April 1978, exactly 50 years to the day since she was last steamed. Here the loco prepares to take the historic service out of Butterley. And just over a year later, the spinner Top and Tails 4F number 4027 out of Butterley on a running in-turn in preparation for the Rainhill celebrations. Rainhill was a proud moment for the Midland Railway Centre. Here the cavalcade begins the journey to the northwest. The Rainhill celebrations took place in May 1980, and a parade of motive power, both past and present, was exhibited to commemorate 150 years of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. Midland Spinner 673 draws admiring looks as she prepares to take part in the procession. Unfortunately, shortly afterwards, the loco returned to York Museum. From the very beginning, it had always been the project's intention to run passenger trains, and a great milestone was reached when in 1981 a light railway order was granted for passenger running. The official opening took place on Saturday the 29th of August 1981, and 4027 took out the first train, bringing a new era to Butterley, the era of the passengers. Butterley lies to the east of the terminus at Hammersmith and the reservoir, and as well as small gauge layouts, Butterley signal box and the paint shop flank the station site. However, it had now become a priority to have a proper station building at Butterley, and in the early 1980s work began. The original station had been raised by M.B.E, but it was noticed that Whitwell Station, near Clown, was of a similar standard Midland Railway design. So work began, and the station was moved stone by stone and erected on the Butterley site. The only differences between the two buildings were that Whitwell was an exact mirror image of Butterley and was stone built as opposed to the original Butterleys being brick built. A far cry from the original booking coach, where up until then visitors had entered the site. It's a tribute to the work of the Midland Railway Centre that the station has now regained its status as a listed building. And the station buildings now stand complete, as Austerity 060 Saddle Tank 68012 and 4F 44027 take a passenger train through the station. In 1986, the station was graced with a royal visit when Princess Anne came to thank the manpower service members who under job creation schemes do so much work on the Midland Railway project. And moving into the modern era, Butterley Station 10 years later. Deltic number 55015 Tullier, without number or nameplates, leaves the station with a Santa special service, standing in for a failed steam locomotive in December 1994. Throughout December, the Santa Special trains have become a popular theme for visitors, not only from the immediate area, but from all over the Midlands. And as well as a ride on a steam train, the centre also offers a range of other attractions for visiting families. Back on the platforms, 47327 arrives with a Santa Special service on Sunday, December the 18th, 1994. Incidentally, the first ever Santa had been ex-British Rail signalman Tom Rogers, who began his career as a station boy at Butterley. During the Second World War, Tom averted what was potentially the greatest disaster in railway history, when, as a signalman at Clay Cross, he managed to use his lamp to alert a sleeping driver on the Devonian, literally yards before it collided with the Thames-Clyde Express at the junction, with both trains packed full with troops. On the western edge of Butterley Station, visitors can enjoy layouts from the Alfreton Model Railway Society, who have been based at the centre since the early 1980s. And further down in Butterley Yard, the larger Garden Railway is to be seen. Repairs and restoration to carriage stock now take place in the paint shop. Inside and outside overhauls can be carried out, as well as welding, stripping, repairs to bodywork and varnishing. Up until the mid-1980s, the paint shop had housed the centre's locomotive fleet, and painting had to be carried out wherever possible. Painter extraordinaire Ernie Bradley is the man in charge. Restoration at the centre has always been of the highest standard, and since the very beginning, the Trust has not just stopped at steam, but has always shown interest in other forms of power. This was illustrated in March 1981 with the arrival of D4 Great Gable, a loco of long-standing Midland region associations. And since then, the diesel fleet has steadily increased to include a large variety of different classes today. But to return to the early 1970s, the framework for the new shed at Butterley Yard was erected in 1974. The building had originally belonged to Derby College and had been situated on Ascot Drive. These scenes show the work in progress on the 13th of July 1974. And 10 years later, Somerset and Dorset 7F number 13809 steams by the site and into Butterley. Opposite the shed in the early days, the track and locos were controlled by a ground frame and flag at Holmes Crossing. Roy Woods gives the OK to 4F460 number 4027. Nowadays, Butterley Box is situated by the site of the old Holmes Crossing. This box was originally sited at Ace Gill on the Settle and Carlisle and was the first working box to be brought to Butterley in the mid-1980s. Class 114 DMU numbers E50019 and E56006 passed the box with a Thomas Special in March 1995. The Thomas weekends always prove popular with children, and both diesel and more usually steam locomotives take part. As the Fat Controller entertains on the platform, industrial Peckett-built 040 locomotive number 1 Lytham brings a service into Butterley. And with Thomas headboard prominent and the Fat Controller visible reflected in the carriage windows, the loco takes the passengers to Swanwick. West of Butterley Station, the route crosses the causeway over Butterley Reservoir to Hammersmith. Let's jump a ride on 3F number 47327 across the reservoir. Incidentally, this was the site of one of the centre's major crises in the early days, when without warning, contractors Thomas Ward moved in to lift the track over the causeway because the council hadn't paid M.B.E the sum for taking the line into ownership. Thankfully, after frantic phone calls by Chairman John Twells, eventually M.B.E Chairman Richard Marsh was reached, who sent the district manager from Nottingham out to call a halt. Hammersmith Station was built in the late 1970s under an early job creation scheme, and the platforms are now overlooked by Hammersmith Box. This signal box was recovered from M.B.E, where it had been located at Kilby Bridge on the Midland Main Line, and HST passes by in the early 1980s. Moving back to 1995, signalman Russell Ashmore gives right away to two of the centre's diesel shunters, numbers 12077 and 08590, hauling the last passenger service of the day on Saturday, March the 18th, 1995. One of the most impressive steam locomotives to be seen at the centre is London, Midland and Scottish Class 8P, number 46203 Princess Margaret Rose, here seen storming back to Butterley over the causeway. And after 47327 has taken water at Butterley Station, we rejoin the crew and head eastwards towards the cutting. And Rail Blue Class 46, number 46045, storms past to Butterley. Because of the single track line in the cutting, loco crews have to obtain a token on entry. M.B.E Standard Class 4 tank number 80080 heads for Swanwick. And two peak locomotives make a splendid sight for the modern traction enthusiast in the cutting on the 18th of September 1994. The centre's commitment to diesel as well as steam traction was illustrated when D4 pulled the first diesel-hauled train only a week after the start of passenger services in 1981. Nearly 15 years on, the loco moves through Butterley Cutting to Swanwick. Class 24 number 97201 Experiment also spent time at the Midland Railway Centre in 1991 after arriving on July the 19th. Here the loco heads for Swanwick, still carrying the distinctive BR Research livery. Swanwick Station is situated to the east of the Midland Railway Centre and features a large number of attractions and museums, as well as a branch line to the former Swanwick Colliery. When the Midland Railway project arrived in the 1970s, Swanwick was a piece of wasteland without a single building on site. 20 years' progress can be noted in this 1990s view. And Class 40 number 212 is seen arriving at the station from the north platform on the 16th of October 1994. This loco was bought by the Class 40 Appeal Group after suffering severe frost damage whilst at Carlisle. However, after a superhuman effort, the loco was restored at Swanwick and started up outside the sheds in October 1992. Work began on Swanwick sheds in the 1970s and stretched over a lengthy period of time. The shed had originally been Wrigley's Wagon Works at Bulwell, but when the site was taken over by a supermarket, the buildings were donated to Butterley. Now named the Matthew Kirtley Museum, the building is one of the biggest in preservation at 42,000 square feet and houses a large variety of museum exhibits from all forms of transport, as well as being used as a running and repair shop for both steam and diesel locomotives. Outside the museum, 2 peak locomotives are cleaned ready to take part in a diesel spectacular, while 2 shunters tow Woodhead Class 77 Electra, which arrived at the centre in 1986 carrying Dutch livery and later received a repaint into Brunswick green. And BR Standard 8008T is coaled up ready for the day's work. just outside the shed, 460 number 44932 and Princess Margaret Rose move on to Swanwick Station and the main line. Princess Margaret Rose went to Butlins at Pwllheli in 1973, but in 1975 preparation was made for the Princess to be moved back to the Midlands. The locomotive was towed to Derby by Class 25 number 25163 and moved to Butterley in November 1975, where she remained as a static exhibit till 1988. Restored to full working order, the loco is now to be seen both on preservation and mainline duties, as noted here, leaving Nottingham Midland on the 19th of September 1994. Class 11 shunter number 12077 was withdrawn in 1971 and moved to Butterley in 1978, returning to active service a year later. In this scene, the loco works in Swanwick Yard with unexpected results. But at the Midland Railway Centre, help is never far away, and the tender is soon back on the tracks and the job once more underway. Class 03 shunter D2138 worked after withdrawal from M.B.E at Pye Hill Colliery, just east of the Midland Railway Centre. The loco is occasionally used on light passenger duties, as noted here, departing Swanwick for Butterley. During September 1994, D4 Great Gable was transformed into long withdrawn sister loco D1 Scaffold Pike, and in this condition the loco leaves the cutting and gives up the token to arrive at Swanwick. And just west of Swanwick, another peak, number 45133, passes through the signals for Butterley at the Diesel Spectacular in July 1991. In 1993, these signals were replaced by a gantry from Shipley in West Yorkshire, Sulzer Class 25 D7671 heads for Butterley. Still situated on a site just opposite the new gantry, the historic carriage and wagon workshop was constructed in the 1970s, and members have restored many items to an extremely high standard, some of which are now to be seen exhibited in the Matthew Kirtley Museum. One of the most tragic occurrences at the centre was the death of Richard Levick, a train machinist and long-time volunteer who was killed on site in the late 1980s. His memory is now honoured by the Richard Levick Workshop, which is built in 3 sections comprising machine shop, mess room and stores. As well as work for the centre, the facilities are also used for subcontract engineering work, including clients such as M.B.E, where work has been carried out on Class 08 and 56 locomotives and other preservation groups. The miniature railway, situated to the east of the workshops, was originally based at Shipley Park and operates usually during the summer months. The centre also plays host to visiting steam locomotives. Back at Swanwick Station, the famous Flying Scotsman arrives from Butterley. And 4F number 4422 leaves the station with a service returning to Butterley on Sunday, March the 5th, 1995. Swanwick Box was the last of the 3 working boxes to arrive at the centre, and originally saw use on M.B.E at Kettering. A Rail Blue 47 passes by in the 1970s. Britain Pit Farm is run by the Trust as a subsidiary to the centre, and whereas 25 years ago the pithead looked out over filth and dereliction, now improvement is underway, and the site features a wide range of farm animals and children's activities. The idea of including a narrow gauge group on the site was first put forward in 1985, and the passenger line opened outside the Matthew Kirtley building in the early 1990s. As well as having workshops and ex-industrial locos and stock, the group have also purchased steam locomotives from Poland, which after re-gauging may be seen at work on the line in the future. Simplex Loco number 1 heads back to the Swanwick terminus. Just north of Swanwick Station, a spur leads off which formerly ran to Swanwick Colliery. 2227, recently named Traction, takes a demonstration freight along the branch on the 19th of September 1994. and Peak 46009 heads off light engine to Swanwick Sheds. The loco in the background is Brush Class 47 number 47594, which arrived at the centre in October 1991 and was the first locomotive to receive a repaint into the new Rail Express Systems livery. The loco was towed to Crewe for the official launch later the same month. Just east of Swanwick, the route passes the Country Park and Golden Valley before arriving at the eastern terminus Ironville and the B.R. Midland Main Line at Codner Park Junction and Pye Bridge. In the early 1980s, after a neighbouring farm sold up, the Midland Railway Centre bought a piece of land adjacent to the track east of Swanwick Station. As time went on, more land was purchased and the region was slowly landscaped into a 35-acre picnic and leisure area with ponds, trees and bushes, setting a fine scene for 46045 in rail blue livery as the loco heads for Swanwick on Sunday, March the 19th, 1995. (47401), the first Class 47 to be built, arrived at the centre in green in 1993 and made its debut in large logo colours on April the 23rd, 1994. Here she pairs up with Class 40 212. And two peaks join forces through the Country Park on the 23rd of July 1994. Class 31s are so far not widely associated with preservation, but 31162, noted here working with 47401, has escaped the cutter's torch and reached Butterley in January 1994. (45133) was brought into preservation in January 1990 and arrived at Butterley in May the same year. Here the loco double heads Class 46 peak number 46045 on the 24th of July 1994. And Deltic 55001 St Paddy, alias 55015 Tullier, leads Class 50 Sir Edward Elgar on the same day. Class 20 number 2227 was the last of the class to be delivered and is the oldest operational mainline diesel of any class. Wearing old rail freight colours, the loco powers bonnet first through the Golden Valley. On the diesel spectacular of the 24th of July 1994, the last train was worked by no less than 4 locomotives, 2 peaks, a Class 20 and a Class 31. And at the eastern terminus of the site, Ginty 47357 takes a selection of historic carriages back to Swanwick. This loco had arrived at the centre from Barry Scrapyard on the 18th of July 1970. Once at Butterley, the loco was restored and first steamed at Derby Locomotive Works on the 16th of June 1973. In the early days, she became a familiar sight as 16440. And back at Ironville in 1995, 47327 runs round the train ready for the journey back to Butterley. And so, as we prepare to end our journey, let's not forget that the first 25 years are only the start of a project at Butterley with almost unlimited potential. Major plans for the future include the building of a modern traction depot and turntable at Swanwick, the arrival of the National Model Railway Society during 1995, and in the long term, extension of the line into the old Pye Bridge station. And who knows, maybe before too long, British Rail trains will stop once more at Pye Bridge to connect with steam-hauled services along the branch to Butterley.